using a product. On real-time liquidity.
Banks, like a bank, Chase wants to deal with a bank in London. Need for X-Rapid. You're talking about the more sort of far-flung places where they might not have a correspondent bank or they don't hold the local currency, so they're going to use this stuff instead.
Yeah.
So give me a specific example of who's going to use it.
So one of the things we've always said is I don't think banks will be the first customers. We've talked about payment providers, and so we have run pilots out there with the MoneyGrams, Western Unions, Mercury FX, Qualix, a couple of others, and those are payment providers that have massive treasury operations. Using one random example, you have a payment provider that has hundreds of millions of dollars of negative working capital because they've taken their dollars or their pesos and they've pre-funded and they've pre-funded the account, so they go into Mexico. Once a week, let's say, they'll wire $10 million to Mexico and then debit, 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 debit along the way. Now, sometimes they overfund, sometimes they underfund. The ability to have real-time liquidity is transformational. The global pre-funded, what are called Nostra-Vostra relationships, it represents something on the order of magnitude $10 trillion. If we can make that more efficient and more useful, we can actually accelerate the engine of commerce kind of on a global basis. Ripple, from its earliest days, has talked about how do we enable an internet of value, and really enabling payments to work move the way information moves today. And I think that's pretty dramatic. So drilling in, we've seen pilots with, I think, 6 different payment providers. I have publicly said we expect this year for at least one bank to use XRP in their payment flows, to use X-Rapid.
Are you sticking to that this year?
100%.
Okay.
And the reason is, just to boil that down a little bit, it's faster, it's cheaper, and so a little bit like, why wouldn't someone use it? And to your point, I don't think JP Morgan Chase, they're one of the largest liquidity providers on the planet. Citibank's one of the largest liquidity providers on the planet. So do I think, for a dollar yen, dollar euro, no. But, look, if you go talk to a lot of banks around the world, they're paying Citibank for liquidity. They're paying JPM for liquidity. And if they can then use a product like X-Rapid to fund real-time liquidity into, let's say, the Philippines, into Brazil, that's a big shift for them in a very positive way.
So you're talking about a bridge currency that maybe local market makers will use. Okay, maybe we buy that. Here's the other thing, though. The price of XRP this year has ranged from 50 cents to $4. Isn't the whole purpose of a bridge currency you need something stable? How do you account for the volatility?
That is, I think, well, I'll start by saying there's a lot of misinformation in the market. And I think, as I'm sure we'll talk about as we're up here, I think in some ways you have these kind of holy wars playing out. One of them is this idea that, hey, these things will never solve payments problems at scale because of the volatility. Let's think about that for a minute. So I can enable an XRP transaction in 3 seconds, and so I have to take the volatility risk of XRP for 3 seconds. Or I can use fiat and use a wire transfer, and I'll say through SWIFT, and that usually is about 3 days. 3 days is 270,000 seconds. So it's almost 100,000 seconds, 100,000 times longer than an XRP transaction. The way you calculate volatility is volatility times time. So if you reduce the time by a dramatic amount, even if the volatility is a lot higher, you actually have less volatility risk through an XRP transaction than you do a fiat transaction with SWIFT. Now, the other thing I'll point out is, people will say, well, couldn't X-Rapid use Bitcoin? And the answer actually is it could. And we've even thought about, architecting the product. There may be circumstances where we would use that because of liquidity. But a Bitcoin transaction today, on average, takes about 45 minutes in, 45 minutes out. So you're talking about an hour and a half of volatility risk as opposed to 3 seconds. So we think XRP is very uniquely positioned to solve that cross-border payments problem.
Yeah, you make the theoretical case well. However, the CEO of Western Union told one of my Fortune colleagues last week that they've dabbled in this stuff, and they're not sure. They take it or leave it. No advantage. Do you have a rebuttal to that?
Yeah, I think it's, well, my first thought is Western Union's been around 100 years. And so the way I think about this is they've been around 100 years. They have spent 100 years optimizing their treasury operations. In 6 months, we launched a product and made it as efficient as what they have optimized for 100 years. So on one hand, I would say, yeah, Western Union has spent a lot of money to optimize their treasury. I think if on V1, actually kind of V.9, because they were using a beta pilot on this, for us to match what they have optimized and they spend a lot of money on is a pretty good start. Now, the second thing I would say is, to some degree, it depends how you calculate these things. Western Union is still, they have negative working capital. They're still pre-funding and holding that dormant capital. So when they talk about that comparison, they're talking about FX. And I look at it and say, well, wait a minute, there's a cost of capital you have to include there as well. And so, and I think Western Union, the CEO said, look, we don't see a cost savings, there's a lot of speed savings. And that still is an improvement. And I think over time, you're going to see if it's a better product at a better price. I'm excited about the future.
Okay, so wait and see. Let's turn to XRP. You make the distinction between Ripple and XRP, but the reality is Ripple owns a big mass of it. They own, I think, more than 50% of it, and they're releasing some in escrow every month. What's going on with that? Are you, the sales, are you changing your strategy there at all, or?
No, we've been very transparent. We are, as you described, we are an owner of a lot of XRP, and in some ways not dissimilar than the early, crowd sale of the Ethereum token. 70% of the tokens were held by the founders. Ripple, the company, was granted a whole bunch of XRP tokens. We sell some. We use some as incentives in the marketplace to get customers engaged and even market makers to make very tight spreads. There's a flywheel and network effects, and once you get that moving, there's some significant efficiencies that can be driven.
You brought up Ethereum, and I think the crypto world last week took a lot of notice of a speech by a senior SEC official who basically said Ethereum and Bitcoin are not securities. He focused a lot on decentralization. That's apparently the key thing, that no one's controlling it, no central actor, no third party. Now I want to read you, he didn't bring up Ripple, but I want to read you something. This is what he said. There will continue to be systems that rely on central actors whose efforts are a key to the success of the enterprise. Doesn't that sound a lot like Ripple and XRP?
I think it sounds a lot like the ICO market. I think these ICOs are issuing tokens. They haven't even released any code. There's no working code, and there's no open source community developing that code. And so they're releasing tokens, and those are effectively what I think the SEC is saying. They've really said for a year now. They're just getting a little more aggressive about it. They're saying these are securities. I think it's really clear that XRP is not a security. And I'll give you 3 key arguments here. One is, if Ripple, the company, shut down tomorrow, the XRP ledger would continue to operate. It's open source, decentralized technology that exists independent of Ripple. The second is, if you buy XRP, like if people buy an XRP, they don't think they're buying shares of Ripple. Like there's a company called Ripple. We are a private company. We have investors. People have bought shares of Ripple, the company. But buying XRP doesn't give you ownership of Ripple. It doesn't give you access to dividends or profits that may come from Ripple.
But doesn't your treasury management, because Ripple does have this hoard of XRP, won't that sort of inform the success of XRP in the long run?
No, I don't think that our ownership of XRP gives us control. I mean, it is an open source, decentralized technology. Just because we own a lot of an asset, Saudi Arabia owns a lot of oil. That doesn't give them control of oil. So I think there's a whole lot of examples where XRP behaves and acts a lot more like a currency, like a commodity. The third point, if the first one is it exists independently, the second one is it's the ownership point, and the third one really back to utility. XRP is solving a problem. Securities there's no utility in a security. So, look, I think the SEC, I look forward to them clarifying some of these things. I thought them
Hola, buenas
announcing them
tardes,
really
bienvenidos,
not
me
as
llamo
a very
Bytrix y
positive
bienvenidos
news
al
for
primer
sure.
evento de
And, I
EJU.
look
Se
forward
estarán
to,
preguntando
their
qué
further
significa
decisions.
EJU.
Yeah,
Bueno,
and yet, though, the
EJU
exchanges
significa
that we
Evento
get
Hispanos
the
Unidos
mainstream
y en este evento
institutions
estaremos
are
presentando
adding
niveles,
new
layouts,
currencies
previews,
slowly.
jugadores,
We're still waiting for
streamers
them
y
to
youtubers,
add
que
XRP.
este último
We think
serían
we'll get it
clips
in
que hayan
US
sucedido en sus directos o cosas importantes